The dust kicked up beneath the galloping hooves as Sarah Jenkins fled across the Montana territory, her heart pounding louder than her stolen mare's thundering stride. The year was 1876, and at 23, she never imagined she'd be running for her life from the very man who had sworn to protect her, her husband of 6 months. Now, a corpse lying in their homestead with her kitchen knife in his chest, his hands still stained with her blood. The wind whipped through Sarah's golden hair as she pushed the horse harder, praying distance would grant her safety. Thomas had been charming once, before the drinking and the violence, before she had to choose between his life and hers. She hadn't meant to kill him, but when he came at her with those wild eyes and raised fists yet again, something inside her snapped. "Faster," she whispered to the mare, knowing the posse would form by morning. Self-defense meant nothing to a woman when a man lay dead, even a man like Thomas. 3 days later, exhaustion forced her to seek shelter in a small town called Redemption Creek. The name seemed a cruel joke as she stumbled into the local saloon, desperate for food and a room. Instead, she found recognition. "Ain't you the Jenkins woman?" a gruff voice called out as she approached the bar. "The one who killed her husband over in Silver Ridge?" Sarah froze, her throat tightening. Before she could deny it, rough hands grabbed her from behind. "Sheriff will pay good money for her," another voice said. "Wanted poster came through yesterday." By nightfall, Sarah found herself locked in a cell, her fate sealed when the sheriff examined her hands and found the telltale mark on her palm, a small burn scar shaped like a crescent moon, exactly as the wanted poster described. "I had no choice," she pleaded. "He would have killed me." The sheriff, a man with cold eyes and a gold tooth, merely shrugged. "Ain't my place to judge. But this town needs money for a new schoolhouse, and bounties on murderers fetch a good price." Sarah's stomach twisted with the realization of what he meant. "You're selling me? Like cattle?" "Auction's tomorrow at noon," he confirmed, pocketing the keys to her cell. "Don't worry, we'll find you a new husband or a ranch that needs workers. Better than hanging." That night, Sarah didn't sleep. She curled into the corner of her cell, trying to imagine a way out of this nightmare. Death might be preferable to whatever awaited her at the auction block. When dawn broke, 2 women entered her cell, carrying a plain cotton dress. "Put this on," the older one ordered, "and don't fight it. Makes things worse." Sarah changed silently, dignity slipping away with each passing moment. When they led her to the town square, her legs trembled beneath her. A wooden platform had been erected, and several men milled about, eyeing her with interest that made her skin crawl. "Remember," the sheriff whispered as he bound her wrists with rough rope, "you're lucky I'm not hanging you. Be grateful." Sarah spat at his feet, earning herself a rough sack thrown over her head. The burlap scratched against her face, suffocating in the summer heat as they pushed her up the steps to the platform. "Ladies and gentlemen," the sheriff announced to the gathering crowd, "today we auction a murderer for the benefit of our town. This woman killed her husband, but she's young, healthy, and can work. Bidding starts at $50. Through the burlap, Sarah could hear the murmurs of the crowd, some disapproving, others eager. The bidding began slowly, $50, $60, $75 for her life. $100, a deep voice called from the back. $120, countered another. $200, the deep voice returned, silencing the others. Sarah trembled, wondering what kind of man would pay so much for a murderer. "Sold!" The sheriff's gavel came down with finality. "To the gentleman in the back, come claim your property, Mr. Jackson." Heavy boots climbed the platform steps, and Sarah could sense someone standing before her. Strong hands reached for the sack, and with one swift motion, pulled it from her head. Sunlight blinded her momentarily, making her squint against its harshness. As her vision cleared, she found herself looking into the bluest eyes she'd ever seen, set in a tanned, weathered face beneath a wide-brimmed hat. The man, tall and broad-shouldered, studied her for a long moment before his expression softened. "See sunlight again, darling," he said, his voice low and surprisingly gentle. "That's no way to treat a lady." Sheriff Barnes snorted. "She ain't no lady. She's a killer." The man who'd purchased her, Jackson, turned to the sheriff. "I've paid my money. She's my responsibility now." He pulled a knife from his belt, causing Sarah to flinch. But he only used it to cut the ropes binding her wrists. "What's your name?" he asked as he worked on the knots. "Sarah," she whispered, her voice hoarse from thirst and fear. "I'm Samuel," he replied, finishing with the ropes. "Samuel Jackson. I've got a ranch about 3 days' ride from here. You'll work, but you'll be treated fair." Sarah rubbed her raw wrists, eyeing him suspiciously. "Why would you pay $200 for a murderer?" A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Let's just say I don't always believe what I hear." He gestured toward a wagon parked nearby. "We should get moving before dark." As they walked away from the platform, the sheriff called after them. "She's dangerous, Jackson. Sleep with one eye open." Samuel didn't respond, simply helping Sarah onto the wagon seat before climbing up beside her. With a click of his tongue, he set the horses in motion, leaving Redemption Creek behind. They traveled in silence for nearly an hour before Sarah worked up the courage to speak. "Are you taking me to the authorities in another town?" Samuel shook his head. "Told you, taking you to my ranch." "Is what, your slave?" He gave her a sidelong glance. "As my housekeeper, if you're willing. Ranch needs looking after, and I'm gone too much to do it proper." Sarah stared at the passing landscape, unable to believe her situation. "Why would you trust a murderer in your home?" Samuel was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "My sister was married to a man who beat her. When she finally fought back, no one believed her story. She hanged for murder 3 years ago." The weight of his words settled between them. "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered. "So am I." He adjusted his hat against the sun. "When I heard about you, I figured maybe you deserved a second chance. Was I wrong about what happened?" Sarah looked down at her hands. "No," she admitted softly. "He would have killed me that night. I'm sure of it." Samuel nodded. "Then you'll have sanctuary at my ranch for as long as you need it." That night, they camped beneath the stars. Samuel gave Sarah his bedroll while he slept sitting up against a tree, his rifle across his lap. True to his word, he made no advances, kept a respectful distance, and shared his provisions equally. By the 3rd day of travel, Sarah had begun to relax slightly in his presence. She learned that Samuel had fought in the war, had come west afterward to start fresh, and now ran a modest cattle operation with the help of 2 ranch hands. "It's not much," he told her as they crested a hill, revealing a small valley below with a sturdy log house and several outbuildings. "But it's peaceful." The ranch was indeed modest but well maintained. A weathered sign reading "Crossroads Ranch" hung over the main gate. 2 men emerged from the barn as they approached, one older with a gray beard, the other younger with a ready smile. "Boys," Samuel called as he halted the wagon. "This is Sarah. She'll be looking after the house. Sarah, this is Hank and Caleb. They help me run things." Sarah nodded cautiously to the men, who tipped their hats in greeting, curiosity evident in their expressions. "Get her settled in the spare room," Samuel instructed Hank. "I need to check on that new calf." The older man helped Sarah down from the wagon. "Don't mind Sam," he said kindly. "Not much for words, but he's a good man." The spare room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small window overlooking the distant mountains. After days on the run and in jail, it felt like luxury to Sarah. That evening, as she prepared a simple supper from the provisions in Samuel's kitchen, Sarah found herself wondering about the strange turn her life had taken. From desperate wife to fugitive to whatever she was now. Not quite free, but not a prisoner either. Samuel entered the kitchen as she was setting the table, bringing with him the scent of horses and open air. He'd cleaned up, his dark hair still damp from washing. "Smells good," he commented, taking a seat at the table. Sarah placed a bowl of stew before him. It's just beans and salt pork. Not much to work with. I'll ride into town tomorrow, get proper supplies. He took a bite and nodded approvingly. Been a while since I had a home-cooked meal. As they ate, Samuel outlined her duties: cooking, cleaning, mending, tending the kitchen garden. In return, he said, you'll have room and board and $10 a month. Sarah nearly dropped her spoon. You're paying me? Work deserves wages, he shrugged, and you're free to leave whenever you want, though I'd appreciate if you'd give notice. Sarah studied him across the table. I don't understand you, Mr. Jackson. Not much to understand. And it's Samuel, or Sam if you prefer. Why would you help me? Really? He met her gaze steadily. Because everyone deserves mercy, Sarah. Even those the law's given up on. The days turned to weeks, and Sarah found herself settling into life at Crossroads Ranch. The work was hard but satisfying, and for the first time in years she wasn't afraid. Samuel was often out working with the cattle, but in the evenings they'd share quiet meals where he'd gradually tell her more about himself or ask careful questions about her life before. She learned he was 32, had never married, and had built the ranch from nothing over 8 years. He was respected in the nearest town, Willow Springs, where he occasionally took her on supply runs. He never introduced her as a fugitive or servant, but simply as Sarah from my ranch, letting people draw their own conclusions. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch watching a thunderstorm roll across the valley, Samuel surprised her with a question. Do you want to tell me about him? Your husband? Sarah stiffened. They'd never discussed the details of her past, though she'd gradually shared fragments of her life before marriage. You don't have to, he added quickly. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, watching lightning fork across the darkening sky. He wasn't always cruel, she began softly. When we first met, Thomas was charming, attentive, said all the things a young girl wants to hear. Samuel remained silent, giving her space to continue. We'd been married 3 months when he hit me the first time. He was drunk, apologized after. I believed him. She gave a bitter laugh. Each time it happened, the apologies grew shorter until they stopped altogether. He'd been drinking heavily that night, came at me with his fists. There was a knife on the table, her voice faltered. You defended yourself, Samuel finished simply. Sarah nodded, tears threatening. I never meant to kill him. I just wanted him to stop. Samuel's hand found hers in the growing darkness, warm and steady. You did what you had to do. That touch, so gentle and without demand, broke something in Sarah. Tears she had held back for months spilled down her cheeks. Samuel didn't speak, didn't try to stop her grief, just held her hand as the storm raged around them. When her tears finally subsided, she realized she felt lighter somehow, as if a burden had shifted. Thank you, she whispered. He squeezed her hand once before releasing it. We all have ghosts, Sarah. Sometimes they need acknowledging before they'll rest. As autumn painted the surrounding hills in gold and crimson, Sarah noticed subtle changes in her relationship with Samuel. Their conversations lengthened, sometimes lasting late into the evening. He brought her books from town, having discovered her love of reading. She found herself watching for his return when he was away, her heart lifting at the sight of him riding toward the house. On a crisp October morning, disaster struck. Sarah was hanging laundry when she heard shouts from the corral. Running toward the commotion, she found Samuel on the ground, his face contorted in pain as Hank and Caleb knelt beside him. Bronco threw him, Caleb explained as she approached. Think his legs broke bad. Samuel's face was ashen beneath his tan, sweat beading on his brow despite the cool air. I'm fine, he gritted out, then groaned when he tried to move. Stop being stubborn, Sarah ordered, taking charge. Hank, Caleb, carry him to the house carefully. Once they had Samuel settled in his bedroom, Sarah examined his leg. The break was clear, the bone hadn't pierced the skin, but his lower leg bent at an unnatural angle. "It needs setting," she told him. "My father was a doctor. I've seen this done." Samuel eyed her skeptically, pain evident in his tight expression. "You sure about this?" "No," she admitted, "but Willow Springs is a day's ride, and this can't wait." After sending Caleb for whiskey and Hank for clean cloths, Sarah steeled herself for the task. "This will hurt," she warned, placing her hands on Samuel's leg. His only answer was to take a long pull from the whiskey bottle before nodding for her to proceed. The crack of bone sliding back into place made Sarah's stomach lurch. But Samuel's only reaction was a sharp intake of breath and a whispered curse. Using pieces of a wooden crate for splints, she bound his leg tightly, working with a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "There," she said when finished, wiping sweat from her forehead. "You'll need to keep off it for at least 6 weeks." Samuel looked up at her with pain-glazed eyes. "You've got a steady hand, Sarah Jenkins." "And you've got the stubbornness of a mule, Samuel Jackson," she retorted, but couldn't keep the fondness from her voice. The weeks of Samuel's convalescence changed their dynamic profoundly. Confined to the house, he was forced to rely on Sarah for nearly everything. She took over management of the ranch, directing Hank and Caleb, keeping the accounts, even making decisions about which cattle to sell when a buyer came through. In the evenings, she'd read to him by lamplight novels, newspapers, even poetry that she'd found tucked in a drawer. Sometimes their hands would brush as she passed him something, and the contact would linger a moment too long to be accidental. One night, as winter's first snow fell outside, Samuel caught her hand as she adjusted his blanket. "You could have left," he said quietly. "While I've been laid up, taken a horse, money from the strong box, been long gone before anyone could stop you." Sarah met his gaze. "Why would I leave?" "Because you're a fugitive, and I can't protect you like this." She sat on the edge of his bed, still holding his hand. "I don't need protection anymore, Samuel. I need—" She hesitated, suddenly uncertain. "What do you need, Sarah?" His voice had dropped lower, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "A home," she whispered. "Purpose. Someone who sees me as I am, not as what happened to me." Samuel's free hand reached up to touch her cheek. "I see you, Sarah. Have from the moment I pulled that sack off your head." The kiss, when it came, felt like coming home after a long journey. His lips were gentle against hers, questioning rather than demanding. Sarah leaned into it, her heart thundering in her chest as her hand cupped his face, feeling the rough stubble against her palm. When they parted, Samuel looked at her with such tenderness that tears pricked at her eyes. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," she confessed. "Neither did I," he admitted. "Never thought I'd feel it at all." By Christmas, Samuel was moving with the aid of a cane, and their relationship had blossomed in the open. Hank and Caleb accepted the change without comment, though Sarah occasionally caught them exchanging knowing glances when Samuel would casually rest his hand at the small of her back, or when she'd absently straighten his collar. They were celebrating Christmas Eve with a special dinner when a knock came at the door. Samuel frowned. Visitors were rare, especially in winter. "Stay here," he told the others, reaching for his rifle before limping to the door. Sarah's blood ran cold when she heard the visitor identify himself as Deputy Marshal William Fletcher from the Territorial Office. She moved silently to Samuel's side, her hand finding his arm. The marshal was snow-dusted and weary-looking. "Sorry to intrude on your Christmas, folks. I'm looking for information about a fugitive, a Sarah Jenkins, wanted for the murder of her husband in Silver Ridge last spring." Samuel's arm tensed beneath Sarah's grip, but his expression remained neutral. "What's your interest in her?" The marshal stomped snow from his boots. New evidence came to light. Thomas Jenkins had a history of violence. 3 previous wives, all died under suspicious circumstances. Last one's brother finally came forward with letters she'd written detailing the abuse. Hope flared in Sarah's chest, almost painful in its intensity. The territorial judge reviewed the case, the marshal continued, ruled it self-defense based on the new evidence. I've been trying to track Mrs. Jenkins down to tell her the charges have been dropped. He looked between them curiously. Any chance you folks might know of her whereabouts? Samuel's hand found Sarah's, squeezing gently. As a matter of fact, he said slowly, she's right here. The marshal's eyes widened as he took in Sarah properly. Well, I'll be. Mrs. Jenkins, you're a free woman. No one's hunting you anymore. Relief buckled Sarah's knees, and Samuel's arm went around her waist, supporting her. Thank you, she managed to say through the emotion tightening her throat. Thank you for coming all this way. Least I could do, the marshal replied. No one should spend Christmas looking over their shoulder. He tipped his hat. I'll be on my way now. Let you folks get back to your celebration. After the marshal departed, Sarah stood frozen in disbelief until Samuel turned her gently to face him. Free, he said softly. Truly free. Sarah looked up at him, suddenly afraid. Does this change things between us? Samuel's brow furrowed. Why would it? Because you don't need to protect me anymore. I'm not your responsibility. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something deeper, warmer. Sarah Jenkins, you haven't been my responsibility since about 2 weeks after you arrived. You've been my partner, my friend, and lately, much more. His hands framed her face. I love you. That doesn't change because some marshal says you're innocent. I love you too, she whispered, the words coming easily now that they'd been set free. He kissed her then, right there in the doorway with snow drifting in around their feet, uncaring that Hank and Caleb could see them from the table. When they finally broke apart, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, he said simply. Sarah's answer was another kiss. This one carrying all the promise of their future together. They married in the spring, when wildflowers carpeted the valley and Samuel could walk without his cane. The ceremony was small, just Hank, Caleb, the preacher from Willow Springs, and a few neighboring ranchers who'd come to respect the quiet couple. Standing before the minister in a dress of pale blue calico, Sarah could scarcely believe the path that had led her here. From terror to desperation, to the auction block where a man with kind eyes had promised her sunlight again. Samuel, handsome in a new black suit, took her hands in his as they spoke their vows. His eyes never left hers, even as his voice grew husky with emotion. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel cupped her face with tender hands. See sunlight again, darling, he whispered, echoing those first words he'd spoken to her before kissing her with all the love that had grown between them. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch prospered under their joint care. Sarah's garden flourished, eventually supplying vegetables not only for their table but for sale in Willow Springs. Samuel expanded their herd, purchasing adjoining land when it became available. 2 years after their wedding, their daughter Lily was born, followed by twin boys, Joseph and James, 18 months later. The house that had once seemed so quiet now echoed with children's laughter and the everyday chaos of family life. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Samuel surprised Sarah with a gift, the deed to the ranch, with both their names listed as owners. It's been yours in truth for years, he told her as she traced her fingers over the document. Might as well make it official. That night, after the children were asleep, they sat on the porch swing beneath a canopy of stars, Sarah nestled against Samuel's side. Did you ever imagine this? She asked, gesturing to the peaceful ranch around them, the house behind them filled with sleeping children. When you bid on a murderer at auction? Samuel chuckled, his arm tightening around her shoulders. Can't say I had it all planned out. Just knew I couldn't leave you there with that sack on your head. Sarah turned her face up to his, studying the face she'd grown to love so deeply, the laugh lines around his eyes, the streak of silver now threading through his dark hair, the quiet strength that had never wavered. Thank you, she said softly, for seeing me when no one else would. He kissed her tenderly, a kiss that held 5 years of shared life and promised many more to come. Best decision I ever made, he murmured against her lips. Bringing you into the sunlight, darling. Best decision I ever made. As night settled fully over Crossroads Ranch, Sarah Jenkins Jackson rested in the arms of the man who'd given her more than just freedom or a second chance. He'd given her a life filled with love, respect, and the quiet joy of being truly seen. The auction block that had once seemed the end of her story had instead been just the beginning, the moment when darkness lifted and light poured in, revealing the path to everything she'd never dared to hope for.